Archaeologists working beside England's Rochester Cathedral uncovered some very strange-looking remains. A woman's skull dating from medieval times. But its severe deformity presented a puzzle. Was this the result of a terrible head injury, or the ravages of the Black Death? Or some other virulent bone-deforming disease? Who was this woman, and what has she suffered from?
So she's got a bulging eye and her deformed cheek, as well as the massive bone overgrowth on the frontal part up here.
She would have been affected in terms of her speech and probably her hearing, in addition to the blindness that she evidently was experiencing in that one eye.
We may think of her as, in her disfigurement, of being something horrific, perhaps a kind of old-fashioned view of a witch.
What is the story of this woman with the deformed skull? How badly did the deformity affect her appearance? And how is she treated by the people around her? The quaint town of Rochester lies in the county of Kent, in England's southeast corner. Beside the historic city cathedral is a small graveyard, dating from the late medieval period. It was here that the grotesque skull was unearthed. Combining scientific detective work with the latest medical technology, archaeologist Lucinda Reeves is taking a journey through time to find out exactly what happened to the woman with the misshapen skull.
The skull from Rochester is particularly fascinating in my mind because it's got this very strange deformity on the right-hand side. So I want to get to the bottom of what caused this and how it would have affected her daily life. Also, using the latest technology, I'm going to find out what she looked like.
It is in Canterbury, about 50 kilometers from Rochester, where Lucinda begins her investigation. Osteoarchaeologist Trevor Anderson has been studying this strange find since its discovery.
Hello,
Hi Trevor, nice to meet you.
Oh, it's good to meet you. Come on in.
Thank you.
In places, the fragile bone appears almost sponge-like, as if it could crumble into dust. It really is a miracle that the skull survived some 6 centuries in the ground to tell its strange tale today. Lucinda's first line of inquiry is to establish a profile of the deceased. The extent of wear and tear on the dental enamel provides an estimate of age at death. The sutures, the dividing lines between the different parts of the skull, indicate that this was a middle-aged woman.
Mean range, we're probably looking maybe 35, 45.
But what had caused the deformity? Was this an injury caused by severe trauma? Perhaps a blow to the head? An injury that left her disfigured for the rest of her life.
Is there any possibility that this was the result of a big thump on the head or some kind of trauma when she was alive?
That is certainly not the result of trauma. What you're looking at is the body's response to an underlying brain tumour. So it's an extremely rare condition, something that you just normally don't see in archaeological material.
Such an ancient example of deformity caused by a brain tumour makes the skull a real treasure for archaeologists.
And it looks really very spongy. What in fact is it?
Well, it is actually bone, and it has developed during her lifetime.
So, the woman wasn't born with the tumour. It emerged later in life, causing her face to gradually transform.
How long would she have been suffering from this?
Well, it's difficult to be certain, but it's a slow-growing tumour, so you may well be looking at a period of, let's say, somewhere around about 10 years.
New porous bone developed around the tumour as it began to grow. As the lump got larger, more bone was produced, creating the skull's warped shape.
So while her relatives or carers would have probably made the connection between this lump on her head, all the deformity, and the symptoms, because it's such a rare disease, they would have wondered where this would have come from and what to do about it.
Well, this is true. I mean, the only thing we can say is, as you say, there were visible changes. So they were probably saying, yes, this is some sort of disease.
So, people who knew the Rochester woman would have seen her appearance change over the years and would have recognized that she was suffering from a terrible illness. The tumor would have caused the woman constant pain, so she probably behaved strangely. Perhaps her townsfolk began to avoid coming into contact with such a bizarre character.
Her eye was bulging out like a frog's eye, and more importantly, we can tell that she was totally blind, because that new bone that we can see right at the back there, that's compressed the optic nerve, so she would have no vision in that eye.
Her right cheekbone also bulged out grotesquely.
Normal bone texture. So she's got a bulging eye and her deformed cheek, as well as the massive bone overgrowth on the frontal part up here.
This poor medieval woman was suffering a rare condition known as a meningioma. A clearer picture of the Rochester woman is beginning to emerge, thanks to initial forensics. Lucinda's investigation is about to take a high-tech twist. She and Trevor take the skull to LifeSign, a medical research lab in London, to be CT scanned. The scan will help them assess the impact the tumor had on the brain and will provide data needed to create a digital facial reconstruction. Lucinda will then get the chance to see the Rochester woman face to face.
Nice and smooth, isn't it?
The great thing about being able to do a CT scan on this skull is that we're able to get so much information from it and about it without invading or harming the data at all, without harming the skull at all.
The CT scanner will take minuscule cross-sectional X-rays of the skull.
It does seem really nice.
These are then
stable,
used to
doesn't it?
reconstruct a 3D computer image, so they'll be able to see the effects of the tumor on the inside of the skull. Over in the control room, the results are beginning to emerge on the computer screen. What the scientists are seeing is the bone that grew around the tumor.
As you know, the scan here is just beginning to show us what's really going on inside the skull that we can't see from the outside. And so how would this have affected her?
Well, I mean, the main clinical symptoms you expect to see with this type of tumour would be very severe pain, especially in the morning.
She might also have suffered nausea, severe headaches, and perhaps epileptic seizures. As time went on, she was probably unaware of what was going on around her, appearing almost stupefied.
The extent of the bony growth inside the skull that we see from the CT scan indicates very strongly that she would have been affected in terms of her speech and probably her hearing, in addition to the blindness that she evidently was experiencing in that one eye.
The CT scan has revealed something highly significant: the cause of death.
So what conclusion can we gain from this here?
Well, we know that this is an aggressive malignant reaction, so we can be quite confident that this is actually cause of death, something that we don't normally know just from dry bone material.
Quite exceptional then.
It is indeed.
Lucinda now knows for sure that this condition brought on the premature death of the Rochester woman. The CT scan images will now be manipulated to create a digital facial reconstruction, showing how the cancer impacted on the brain. But this will take time to be processed, giving Lucinda a chance to do some further research. She's on the hunt for a historical reference to someone suffering the same condition.
Remarkably, I've managed to find an account of someone who had the same condition as our woman from Rochester. He was a knight called Caspar Bonacurtius, lived around about the same time. Caspar Bonicurtius, a noble knight, began to lose his mind gradually over a 2-year period, to such an extent that finally he was completely stupefied and did nothing rationally. He had no desire for food and ate only when forcibly fed. He went to bed only when compelled, and sat at a table resting on his arms and sleeping almost all the time. All the while, watery mucus dropped copiously and frequently from his nostrils. Finally, after matters had gone on thus for 6 months, he died.
The Rochester woman would most likely have suffered the same disturbing symptoms as Caspar Bonicurtius. What did people around her make of it all? These were superstitious times. Would she have been singled out and persecuted as a woman possessed by the devil? Archaeologist Lucinda Reeves is investigating the case of a medieval woman from Rochester, England. She died of a brain tumour that grew so large that her skull became totally misshapen. Lucinda is exploring whether or not people around her treated this disfigured woman as an outcast. The burial site may provide some vital clues. Lucinda has called on social historian Andrew Butcher to help paint a picture of life in medieval Rochester.
It's extremely squalid and has great poverty, alongside wealth which comes from trade and from participation in local agriculture. It's also a place which, like many others, is experiencing very high death rates from the Black Death and from widespread epidemic disease of all kinds.
The Rochester woman wasn't born with the disease. She may even have been a wife and mother before the tumour began to grow. But then the headaches would have started and her face would have begun to change dramatically. She may have been quite a shocking sight.
We may think of her as, in her disfigurement, of being something horrific, perhaps a kind of old-fashioned view of a witch. It's possible, too, that people saw her as someone who had been visited by God and punished here by God. It may also be that they saw her as possessing certain kind of spiritual qualities which other people didn't possess, as though she were in some way in touch with suffering and in touch with God.
Rochester was a devout community. Its spiritual centre was the foreboding cathedral, towering above the surrounding buildings. It was the heyday of religious pilgrimage in medieval England. Pilgrims would often stop to worship in Rochester Cathedral on their way to a major hub of English Christianity, Canterbury, only 50 kilometres away. Rochester Cathedral had a shrine to Sir William of Perth, believed to possess healing powers. The sick woman may have come to Rochester from out of town in search of a cure.
Is it possible, do you think, that she might have been a pilgrim coming to see William of Perth for maybe getting cured or something like this?
I think it's possible. One can imagine people coming here, perhaps on their knees, perhaps sinking to their knees, perhaps offering prayers, perhaps trying to touch or kiss the shrine, and it may very well be that, that our woman was among those.
Walking around Rochester Cathedral gives Lucinda the distinct feeling that she could be walking in the footsteps of the medieval woman she's investigating.
I think that the most striking thing about this cathedral is that a lot of what you see here is what she would have seen something like 600 or 700 years ago. That's a really quite special feeling, that she would have been walking around here.
The woman was buried in a grave known as a cyst. It had been lined with stone, showing the care and attention with which she was laid to rest. After all, this was the time of the plague, and death rates were very high. Bodies were buried in their hundreds in mass burial pits on the outskirts of settlements. The Rochester woman's careful burial in a single grave beside the cathedral shows us that she was someone special.
If there's someone being buried here, if it's in a stone cyst, it seems to me likely that this person is not going to be a pauper, they're not going to be someone of low status, they're likely to be someone who has thought ahead about burial. And I think all that points in favour of her being someone of higher status in the town.
Lucinda now knows that the Rochester woman was probably not a pauper or a visiting pilgrim, but more likely a respected citizen. Since she was buried right next to the cathedral, it may be that she was a member of staff at the adjoining monastery.
A monastery of this kind needs servants and has a permanent body of servants, that she might have been one of the servants of the cathedral itself, and that might have given her a special reason to be buried in the lay cemetery, I think.
So she may have been employed as a servant at the monastery until the illness took over, making it impossible to work. The woman's identity is becoming clearer. Investigating the historic town, Lucinda thinks she may have traced the setting of the final chapter in the woman's life. On her hunt for further evidence, Lucinda makes a relevant discovery.
I've just been walking around Rochester and I happened to come across this building. And I noticed up on the plaque there, I was really interested to see that a hospital was founded on this site in 1316. So it got me wondering whether she might have actually been treated here.
But hospitals in medieval times were very different from today's.
The kind of disease that she is suffering from is not the kind that they'd see as within their medical possibilities. They wouldn't know how to treat such a thing.
Medical science had a long way to go. 14th century Rochester's hospital would have been more of a hospice, offering care and support for the dying. There would have been little medical treatment available to a person suffering such a serious condition. Some minor ailments would have been dealt with by traveling surgeons. Bloodletting was common practice, using leeches or by cutting a vein. Other conditions were treated with hot poultices, and in extreme cases, surgery was carried out using sharp instruments or hot irons, at great risk to the patient. Skilled physicians were few and far between, located mainly in London and the preserve of the very rich or influential. The ordinary folk of Rochester would have only been able to afford the services of local healers supplying a combination of spells and herbal remedies. No herbal remedy could relieve the pain caused by the meningioma, as it bored into the woman's skull and ate away at her brain. She would have suffered terribly. Her family and friends probably would have tended the sick woman. She may have been given opiates to take her away from the pain. If seizures a possible side effect, it may have been necessary to restrain her by tying her to the bed. Her carers would have done their best for her as the aggressive tumor took its toll. Three weeks have passed since a CT scan, and the facial reconstruction is complete. Lucinda has come to witness the high-tech unveiling of the Rochester woman.
We've now got the data back, so let's sit down and have a look at it. Okay.
So is this the moment when I actually get to see her?
It is indeed. So we first started off and we made a nice 3D of the teeth there.
The computer program shows clearly the extent of the tumor, purple on the screen.
So that really does show it very graphically, doesn't it?
It's very rare to get to see this condition so far advanced, as these days a meningioma is usually diagnosed and treated at an earlier stage.
Mm-hmm. And this hole here, that's the hole that was actually caused by the cancerous aspect of this condition that set off.
Yeah.
Actually, the use of colour in this really does help that stand out, doesn't it?
It gives it a very good depth as well.
Mm-hmm.
Lucinda can clearly see the impact of the tumour on the soft tissue.
So all of this purple area was the tumour?
Is the tumour, yeah.
Although we knew that the tumour would have actually been behind the right eye, we've been pressing against the orbit there, which would have made her blind in that eye. This image here shows far more clearly and obviously, not only was it inside the skull, but actually all round the side and behind the eye.
Coming into the soft tissue, which is
absolutely
what it shows. So what we can do is we can take off the bone and just have a look at the pure size of the tumour and how it's actually affecting the brain as well there. You can see that it's a fair size if you compare it to the sort of size of the teeth and even the size of the brain there. I too was very surprised on the size of the tumour, but it's quite apparent from the enlargement of the eye area that it did grow this sort of size. Yes, we've filled...
The tumour extended from the woman's brain into the eye socket and pushed her eye forward, causing it to bulge out.
We can even show that by looking at a side view there. A little bit more how forward it is.
Yes, it does protrude. And the other side, can you show the other side for me to compare? You can really see it there, actually, the two of them, the normal eye and the other one coming past it.
Yes. Okay, so let's go ahead and we'll...
This is very exciting.
As the computer adds the layers of muscle, flesh and sinew onto the bone, the face begins to take shape. The skin is the finishing touch, and at last Lucinda is about to see the fully reconstructed face and the culmination of all her research.
Okay, so now we have the muscles on. Let's put the skin on and see what she would look like.
She's not that attractive, is she?
She's not, no.
Even without the bump. Yeah, at last seeing her like this. She does look very different to how I imagined her.
She does.
It's this tumour. It looks like there's something spreading and creeping under her skin. And I thought that perhaps the tumour would have mainly been on the inside.
That's right.
And deforming the bone and pushing the eye out. But here, from
the computer program shows the severity of the woman's facial disfigurement. It's clear that she would have been quite a shocking sight.
It looks very lumpy, doesn't it?
Very nice view here, we can see. This profile of the tumour there coming through the skin.
Oh, that angle was very good, actually, where you really can see how it's pushed the soft tissue out. Yes, from the profile. And obviously, because of the tumour pushing the eye forward as well, it's actually opened the eye much more widely as well, which gives this strange staring effect, even though obviously she was blind.
Having put a face to the mysterious skull, Lucinda's quest to uncover the truth behind the life and death of this medieval woman has reached its end. She's gained a special insight into a rare and terrible condition and has figured out how it would have affected the victim both physically and socially.
These pictures prove that she was quite badly disfigured. Despite this, I feel that she was nevertheless a very valued member and cherished member of society. The key piece of evidence in this is that despite the fact a lot of people being buried in mass graves because of the plague that was rampant at the time, she was given a single burial in a stone-lined grave right next to the cathedral.
The poor woman of Rochester spent many years suffering pain and distress before the tumour took its ultimate toll. But she probably died with her loved ones around her, looking after her as best they could until the end, and carefully preparing her for a fitting burial in a single grave beside the cathedral, a full Christian burial with all due ceremony and respect. Locked in this mysterious, dried-out body are many secrets. It was crammed in a storage box and found by accident in a private garage. More sinister still was that it showed signs of foul play.
Well, her injuries show some type of very high trauma.
Who was this? What had happened here? Over 20 years after its initial discovery, state-of-the-art technology may at last provide some answers to who this was and how they died.
This is her
incredible.
actual skull here.
With modern technology, we have now found really shocking information that we would never have learned.
In 1980, in the sleepy Southern Californian town of Lemon Grove, a grisly discovery was made. A local woman doing some spring cleaning in her garage came upon a dusty old cardboard box. On opening it, to her horror, she found a curled-up dead body. Her immediate thought was that there had been a murder, and she called the sheriff's department.
When the sheriff arrived, he determined that this was not a recent murder, but was an ancient mummified body, and he had it brought to the San Diego Museum of Man.
The Museum of Man is housed within a complex of beautiful buildings in San Diego. This is where the police brought the mummies for the scientists to study in depth. The seemingly peaceful repose of this young woman's remains belies the fact that her life story is shocking, and her story after death is incredible. Ever since its bizarre discovery in 1980, the mummy has been under the care of anthropologist Rose Tyson. For over 20 years, she's been studying this mummy and has got to know almost every facet of the fragile remains.
When you first see the mummy, it's not clear how her position is arranged, but what we're seeing is the left shoulder here, her left hip, here's her leg, her left leg, her knee, and you can follow the leg down here to the anklets, which are made of cotton, and her 2 feet are crossed. And you can see the tips of her fingers there between the legs. And if you notice, the face is upside down. The eyes are down below, and this is her lips and chin area.
But how did the body end up in a box in a suburban garage?
Curators at the Museum of Man can only guess, but they believe the mummies are...
Back in 1980, the mysterious discovery made network news.
Young when she died, probably 16, 17, 18. And
Little was known about the mummy, but even less was known about exactly how she ended up in the Lemon Grove garage.
It's believed they were left there by the ex-boyfriend of the woman's daughter. Homicide detectives are now in the process of trying to track the man down.
I know of no reason why he shouldn't come forth and volunteer the information to us at this time, but if he doesn't, then we'll attempt to find him in some other way.
Eventually, 2 men came forward and, preferring to remain anonymous, told their incredible tale to Rose. Our story begins over 1,000 kilometers south of San Diego, in the remote Sierra Madre Mountains of Chihuahua, northern Mexico.
In 1966, 2 young men from San Diego went to Chihuahua, and this was right before they were going to be drafted for Vietnam. So this was kind of a last lark, they felt.
They had heard rumors that mummies could be found in caves in the mountains. Intrigued by this, the 2 young men set off in search of a mummy. But after about a month of searching, the young men were still empty-handed. They found themselves in a large cave, 20 to 30 feet deep. These caves have been used over many centuries as burial places by the local tribes. The cold, dry air of the high mountain caves naturally mummified the bodies. It wasn't long before the boys found what they were looking for.
There was a child mummy that was fragmentary that they found against the wall. It had been trampled by cattle, so the skull was gone and most of the left side of the body.
The young men collected up the small mummy and ventured further into the dark cave. They came upon a mysterious object wrapped in palm leaf matting. To their amazement, it was a curled up, completely intact adult mummy. The mummy was in the fetal position and wrapped in a mat. It was in very good condition. The hair was shiny black and the skin was smooth, although as dry as leather. Evidence suggested that she'd been buried according to ancient traditional funerary rituals, which had been carried out here for generations. Her body was laid to rest along with several food offerings in a pit lined with pine tree bark. She was then covered with soil. It may be that these ancient people didn't realize that these conditions would result in mummification. Many mummies found throughout the world, such as the famous mummies of ancient Egypt, were preserved by elaborate embalming rituals. However, the Lemon Grove mummy is an example of a naturally preserved mummy. There are other examples of this fascinating phenomenon. These 500-year-old Inuit mummies were found in caves in Greenland. These Peruvian baby mummies were discovered in the high Andes. With all these mummies, it was the cold, dry air and the protection of the caves that was the key to their preservation.
So maybe there had been something in the fact that the pine bark, has a lot of pine rosin, and maybe that helped keep out some of the bacteria that would cause putrefaction. So she dried up just perfectly without decaying.
For the two men who found the mummies, the question was, what to do with them? After smuggling them across the border into the United States, the two men secretly stored them in a girlfriend's garage, without her parents' knowledge. And there they left them, sealed in a cardboard box, undisturbed, for 14 years. The first task for Rose in her forensic investigation was to X-ray the bodies. She focused her attention on the adult mummy. Examination of the pelvis and the teeth confirmed that this was a young girl of about 15 years of age.
A mummy is like a time capsule from the past. And when we had our first X-rays, we were astonished to find that there was information that was such a surprise to us that we had to go further and find the full details.
The X-rays revealed a tragedy. Nestling among the girl's bones was a collection of far smaller bones, those of an unborn baby.
When we first saw that she was pregnant, this was quite a revelation because we knew we had something that was incredibly unusual and unique.
But there was more to come. The girl's femur or thigh bone had been wrenched out of place.
A femur head fits right in that socket. That's the strong hip socket. The femur head was out about 1/2 inch. The other one on the left side was in perfect condition. So this entire side of the pelvis was moved forward. This was dislocated and this was dislocated.
Initial forensics raised as many questions as they answered. For Rose, the picture is still hazy.
One of the most important questions that I wanted answered was, why did she die?
This girl suffered terrible injuries and died at a very young age, pregnant with her unborn infant. Further forensic investigation using the most up-to-date technology available may help Rose find out why she met this untimely end. Anthropologist Rose Tyson is investigating the death of a young woman. Rose is determined to find out how this expectant mother met her untimely end before she was able to give birth to her baby. The mummy is surprisingly light. Much of human body weight is in its water content, so a dried-out mummy is a fraction of its former weight. This allows Rose to easily move the mummy around as she inspects it. Several interesting details are revealed, such as an ancient body adornment.
Her left ear is visible, and if you look carefully, you can see that there is a little wooden plug sticking through a hole in her earlobe, which would keep the hole open for ear ornaments.
Under close examination, Rose discovers something more sinister, evidence of a severe blow to the head.
What we're seeing here is the surface of her skull, and there is a smooth area that is the normal skull surface, and then above that is a porous area which shows she had a blow to the back of the skull and it healed. The blood in the bruise ossified or changed to bone.
It's certain that this injury was no killer blow, as the damage healed sometime before the girl died. Rose is none the wiser as to the cause of death. If she can find out more about her life, she may well be able to decipher the facts surrounding her death. The woven string skirt found on the mummy will provide Rose with a good idea of when the girl lived.
We were able to get a C14 date on some of the string skirt, and the age was over 800 years old. So we knew this was before European contact with this part of the world.
Traditional Mexican culture is alive and well in San Diego, thanks to its large Hispanic population. The city is full of Mexican restaurants serving the same simple dishes that have been prepared and eaten for generations. It is in one of these that Rose meets Dr. Amadeo Rea, an expert in early Mexican culture.
Well, all of those people in the Sierras were pretty much living the same lifestyle. They were gatherers with wild foods, they were hunters, and they were agriculturalists, so they were all growing corn. And
Dr. Rea explains that the staple diet for hundreds of years in the High Sierra region was corn. The girl would have carried out the daily duties of grinding the corn to make masa, a kind of moist dough. This would be used primarily for making tortillas, a soft, flat corn bread.
corn was there at every meal. Breakfast, lunch, supper, and even in drinks, corn would have been one of the main components of the drinks.
The carbon dating of the Lemon Grove mummy has helped Dr. Rea to more accurately place her in a historical context.
The women were very important in the culture. They did lots of weaving with fiber. They made the ceramics, they made the pottery, they made the ollas.
Would it have been unusual for a young teenage girl who lived during this era to be pregnant?
Women in her society at that time probably married at a very young age. By about 13 or 14, most girls would have been married, and a girl of about 15 in her society probably had one or perhaps two children by that age.
This is not the time to fall down.
Today, the mummy of this young woman is going on yet another journey. Rose is taking her to be CAT scanned at a medical clinic in San Diego. Will this finally reveal her fate? The event has aroused the interest of the media. Several local news crews are here to witness this exciting, high-tech look at the mummy.
Found in the hills of Chihuahua, Mexico by two San Diego men, the mummy eventually ended up...
This could be Rose's opportunity to get to the bottom of this ancient mystery.
We hope that the new CAT scans would tell us more fine detail about all of the trauma that is hidden in her bones and possibly anything about cause of death.
The CAT scan takes hundreds of images, each showing a different slice. Rose and the team will be able to view every part of the mummy, inside and out, without damaging it. For Rose, who has known this mummy for over 20 years, it's an exciting moment.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's a view I've never seen. The entire spine. What an incredible image.
The CAT scan images are loaded into a powerful computer. Within minutes, monitors display breathtaking 3D images of the mummy. The complete skeleton can be viewed in exquisite detail from all angles. Rose is taken through the results by Chief Radiologist Dr. Brian Moffat.
Well, Rose, you're really going to be impressed by these images. The images that we're looking at right now are 1.3 millimeter sections, and we can take this data and use it to reconstruct three-dimensional renderings.
Oh my goodness. Oh.
And this is her,
that's
her
incredible.
actual skull here.
Oh.
So that's
incredible.
We can see the exact definition of her face and skull.
These 3D renderings of the CAT scan images reveal the injuries to the girl's skeleton in detail, some of which Rose has never seen before.
possibly could have had a shoulder dislocation or something like that.
And she did have a blow to the back of her skull because there's an ossified hematoma back there.
Is that right? Let's look and see if we can. Seems to be some thickening there, a little bit of ossification right here.
Oh.
That's it right there.
There it is.
Mm-hmm. So
amazing.
So that's
Rose is still no closer to identifying the cause of death, but she can see how harsh life was 850 years ago, even for a fit young woman.
So she probably led a fairly rugged life.
It appears that she had a very rugged life. So.
Eking out an existence in the windswept, rugged Sierra Madre Mountains hundreds of years ago would undoubtedly have been full of hazards, especially for a pregnant young woman.
This woman would have been living in a country that was extremely rugged. Huge canyons that go down to subtropical areas and upper slopes that are pine oak woodlands, beautiful, beautiful wooded areas.
The women of the tribe spent much time alone in this harsh environment, harvesting food.
This girl would have been out and knowing how to gather wild plants. She would have been harvesting things like prickly pear, manzanita berries, acorns, and other wild berries and fruit. And they traveled enormous distances going through the mountains on these trails that they'd been using for centuries.
Such rough terrain would have been heavy going for a pregnant woman. Rose was never able to tell from the x-rays how many months into her pregnancy the girl was. Using the high-definition image now available, Brian can assess how well developed the fetus was.
Superimposed over the maternal pelvis, just the faintest outline of the fetal ribs right here. You can see them. That's where these little white lines relate to the fetal ribs there.
By careful analysis of each section of the CAT scan, Brian can pick out the fetus's individual bones.
CAT scan, we can see inside the pelvis, and this is part of the fetal parts. And again, we're seeing
from the baby's thigh bone, he will be able to judge how advanced the pregnancy was.
Here's the thigh or femur with a measurement of almost 7 centimeters that would place the fetus at about 30 weeks, 7.5 months.
So the young woman was just a few weeks away from birth. The CAT scans also reveal that the baby's head is in the birthing position, suggesting that labor was imminent or had even already begun. Tragically, it was a birth that was never to be completed. The cause of her death is still puzzling Rose.
So it looks normal?
It looks normal, yes. Now that we're in the maternal pelvis, there's some interesting findings here. I'm not sure, maybe with your background and knowledge of her, you might be able to shed some light on it. It looks like there's pieces of bone that have broken off the right side of the pelvis near the sacroiliac joint.
Brian can see the hip dislocation that Rose identified on the x-rays. He can also make out several fractures associated with this injury. It turns out to be far worse than Rose had thought.
You can see that the thigh bone has slipped out of the socket compared to the normal appearance of her left hip. And then the fracture in the front of the pelvis there. All three of these commonly associated with serious injuries.
So today, how would a person get that kind of trauma?
Usually when we see an injury like that, it's a high-speed car accident. Where a person would be T-boned or a car would strike at a perpendicular angle and with a very strong driving force through the door and injure a person like this. And quite frequently it can be a life-threatening problem unless their appropriate treatment is quickly available. So you could just imagine her predicament 900 years ago.
And being pregnant to have this kind of injury.
No question, that would have been a very difficult situation.
So she may have overbalanced, lost her footing, and fallen down the treacherous mountainside of the Sierra Madre and lain helpless at the bottom of the ravine. The fall would almost certainly have killed her. But why did she fall in the first place? Dr. Rea reckons she fell while running away from a serious threat.
Occasionally there were raids from one tribe to another. Girls would be stolen during raids, and I think it is possible that this young girl was running away from someone who was trying to capture her.
So, in fleeing the clutches of rival tribesmen for whom a fertile woman would have been a prize catch, the girl fell to her death. Thanks to the care with which her people buried her, and a bizarre set of circumstances that led to her remarkable preservation, her body is still here today, a valuable window into the past.
When you have a mummy, you have the actual remains of that person. So it is a very personal thing. She has a very strong aura about her, and I think people are drawn to her.
The fact that life was snatched away from not only this young woman, but also her unborn child, has tugged at the heartstrings of many. But thanks to modern science, the legacy of the Lemon Grove mummy will last forever. While excavating the site of a temple dating from Roman Britain, archaeologists made a grisly discovery. A skull placed in an upright position was found at the bottom of a deep pit. Strangely, there were no other bones from the rest of the skeleton found with it. The skull showed signs of having been battered with a heavy weapon.
This is the sort of thing that you observe in forensic cases when somebody's been whacked on the head with a blunt instrument.
But even more intriguing were the countless scratches on its surface.
Under a microscope, they appear to be made by a very fine, very sharp knife.
Was this person the victim of warfare or murder? Or do the strange marks on the skull point towards something darker still? Perhaps human sacrifice. It's a puzzle that such a seemingly barbaric act took place during a time of relative law and order under Roman rule.
You don't expect to find decapitated heads placed in pits in the middle of a Roman city.
Could this bizarre find reveal something new about the lives of our ancient ancestors? The historic town of St. Albans lies about 30 kilometers north of London. Today it is peaceful and respectable, but the macabre discovery of the mutilated skull suggests that its ancient past may tell a different story. Nestling among St. Albans' quaint buildings and winding streets are the remains of the town's Roman past. These ancient stones hold vital clues that could unravel an intriguing mystery. Archaeologist Miranda Green is a leading expert in ancient Britain. The story of the skull so far makes her suspect that this person was the victim of a ritual killing. Applying the latest technology, she hopes to determine for sure how and why this person was killed, and what exactly happened to their head afterwards.
We've got this cut going across here.
I mean, are we actually dealing with the very point of the blade here?
It was here, near the site of a large Roman temple, that the skull was brought up from the bottom of an ancient pit. Archaeologist Rosalind Niblett was there at the time of the discovery and shows Miranda exactly where the skull was found.
Well, down on the slope, as you went down the slope, you would have come past a whole lot of deep pits, shafts almost, about 40 of them.
And these are rubbish pits, or?
Well, they had quite a lot of rubbish in them, but not all of them. Some of them had very peculiar things in, particularly this one pit, which right at the bottom had a human skull.
Just on its own?
Yes.
No body? Just the skull?
No, just the skull.
So what did you think when you excavated this skull? You must have thought,
Well, I mean, it obviously wasn't a burial because there was no other body. So immediately we thought, well, this is rather odd.
Miranda is determined to solve the mystery surrounding the strange solitary skull. Her search for clues begins at the Verulamium Museum in St. Albans.
Yes, in here.
The skull is in a simple box, stored alongside the hundreds of other artifacts kept in the museum vaults.
Shall I take it?
Okay, thanks.
Miranda is keen to set eyes on the skull for the first time, to see up close the damage it has received.
Gosh. We can immediately see that there's been quite a lot of trauma, hasn't there?
Well, some of it is after it's been buried, I think. It's, but you see this hole here, and there's another one here. These seem to have been deliberate blows to the head in antiquity.
So possibly the cause of death, then?
Either the cause of death or very shortly afterwards, yes. But sort of more interestingly, in a way, was when it was washed, we could see all these sort of striations here.
Oh, yeah.
Now, those aren't natural.
No, and they're running in lots of different directions.
Yes, it's almost as if it had been sort of scratched, you know. Yeah. And I thought, well, that's odd.
Miranda hits the road in her hunt for clues. She takes the 145-kilometre journey to Portsmouth, a historic naval town on England's south coast. Her destination is a forbidding military fort.
So we've come to this amazing early 18th century fort where we've got the headquarters of English Heritage, the Centre for Archaeology, and it's at the laboratory here where they've got the technology where we can really get a close look at this skull and see what's really been going on.
Miranda is after the opinion of forensic archaeologist Simon Mays.
Right, what have we got here then?
Well, something I think is going to interest you anyway.
His expertise in the study of bone will help answer some of the questions surrounding the strange skull. They carefully unpack the fragile remains. The lower jaw and several teeth are missing and were not in the pit. It's the rest of the skull that is here to tell the tale. It's clear that much of the trauma was inflicted around the time of death, but some damage has occurred during the 2,000-year-old stint in the ground. Simon can deduce a lot by scrutinizing the primary evidence in this ancient case.
This seems to be a fairly young individual. If you look at the sutures that connect the skull bones, you can see that there's quite a gap between them. And this is pretty typical of an adolescent individual.
The teeth will give them a better idea of the person's age at time of death.
This is the upper jaw, and if we look at this, we can see that there's this wisdom tooth here, the third molar. And if we pop it back into the socket, we can see that it's still unerupted. Which again is shorter, isn't it? That's right. So I think we're talking about somebody who's about 15 or 16 years of age, something like that.
So the victim was an adolescent on the brink of adulthood.
As regards whether it's male or female, that's pretty clearly a male skull. I mean, we can see the development of the brow ridge in this area here.
Well, that's great, and it would be with a...
Absolutely, yes, and you've got a sort of sloping forehead. Men have sloping foreheads, women have vertical ones. So looking at this, I'm pretty confident we're dealing with a boy of about 15 or 16.
Having established the age and sex, Miranda is keen to move on to the more intriguing aspects as to how this young boy died.
Clearly, this skull has received some kind of damage. I mean, can you tell anything about that at all?
Well, just looking at this, within the skull, we can see some very interesting injuries. For example, there's a hole just here. If you look at the shape of that hole there, you can see it's beveled internally.
These inward-pointing edges of the hole are a clear indication of foul play.
This is the sort of thing that you observe in forensic cases when somebody's been whacked on the head with a blunt instrument.
Right, and that could have killed him, could it?
Oh, I think so, yeah. I mean, there's no sign of healing there.
No.
And that's detached, a chunk of bone which has got pushed out down into the brain.
Right.
In total, there were 4 separate injuries of the same kind on the skull.
I imagine it was a sort of flurry of blows, once in the sort of forehead area, once on the side of the skull, and 2 more times at the back there. So he's received quite a beating.
He has, hasn't he? Yes.
These terrible head injuries clearly point to a horrendous attack. But how does Simon interpret the puzzling cut marks that Rosalind identified back at the museum?
There's a great variety of scratch marks, and we can see quite clearly here, they seem to run in all different directions, in a sort of random way, almost. It's quite extraordinary.
So what do you think the purpose of those cuts is?
When you find cut marks of this nature on the skull, you're really looking at 2 different possibilities.
Right.
The first one is scalping, and the second one is defleshing.
There's a crucial difference. With scalping, the desired object is the scalp itself, but with defleshing, the aim is to remove the skin and flesh, and it's the skull that is valued.
And what do you think we've got then?
I'm pretty sure we've got defleshing. With scalping, you tend to get a sort of halo of cuts. I mean, what's actually, you'd be grabbing the hair and cutting round it and popping the thing off. That doesn't seem to be the case here, because these cuts are randomly orientated and distributed over the entire area of the skull.
But if this young man died in a frenzied attack, why was the flesh cut off his skull and his head then removed and placed in a deep pit near a sacred site? It doesn't smack of plain and simple murder, but of something more sinister and bizarre, a throwback to an Iron Age ritual.
We've certainly got evidence both from archaeology and from the classical literature that heads were collected as battle trophies. So one thing you do, you kill your enemy, you take the head, you sling it along your saddle or perhaps put it on your spear tip, and you take it home and you offer it up in the temples of the gods of victory as a kind of, thank offering for succeeding in battle.
Could the strange skull of St. Albans have belonged to an enemy warrior? There is another possible explanation.
The other idea, which I think I favour, is the notion that it was some kind of ritual enactment, that it was possibly associated with human sacrifice, but if not to do with sacrifice, some kind of collective ritual act.
This youth died during the 2nd century, the height of Roman rule in Britain. The Romans had brought with them their rites and religions, but remnants of Celtic ritual practices still survived. But who was doing it? And how did they do it? Ritual sacrifice expert Miranda Green is on an investigation. She's trying to find out how and why a young boy was killed, decapitated, and his head defleshed. Her search has brought her to the Fort Cumberland Laboratory in Portsmouth, where state-of-the-art equipment will be used to examine the strange cut marks found on the skull. Scientist David Dungworth is using an electron scanning microscope to produce a really detailed close-up of the marks.
Well, the skull itself is too big for us to examine in the electron microscope, so what we're going to do is we're going to take some silicon rubber impressions of the cut marks.
One of the things I'd like to know, whether you've got different kinds of cut, possibly suggesting different hands at work. Because I've got this theory that maybe lots of people were involved in this and sharing the responsibility for that action.
Once a detailed imprint of the scratches has been taken, these small samples have to be coated with a fine layer of gold in order to show up every microscopic detail of the scratches. The team gather round to analyze the results.
Well, this is quite interesting, this one. Firstly, it shows the random nature of the cuts and the way they seem to crisscross one another. Well, I mean, you can see it's very clearly on this one. We've got 2 cuts going in this direction here and being cut by another one crossing straight across them. So you've got dense intercutting, crisscrossing of cuts here. Another thing that's interesting is you can see there's a variation in the width of the cuts. You've got a very narrow knife mark in there. This one's rather wider, and this one seems to be sort of intermediate between the 2. It's possible that there are different blades being used.
Could this variation in the cuts back up Miranda's theory that this was a ritual defleshing carried out by several people?
Something that's quite clear from not just this SEM image, but from all the other ones, is that there's a regularity in terms of depth. They're all fairly light cuts. So, I mean, if I had to make a call on this, I'd probably tend to the idea that it's one individual rather than several.
So Miranda's theory that a number of people were involved in the defleshing has been overturned. The highly detailed electron microscope results have thrown up further food for thought.
There are some quite subtle marks that the SEM image has revealed. We have these very shallow linear impressions running roughly parallel to one another, sort of from top right to bottom left. And what those seem to me to represent is scraping marks. The blade being scraped across the surface of the skull. This kind of an action, across like that, and these little marks would come out of irregularities in the blade as it's being drawn across to actually scrape off adherent skin and flesh. And that's something new that we've learnt by looking at the SEM images. We couldn't tell that just by looking at the gross specimen.
This high-tech, detailed examination of the skull points towards an orderly ritual killing and careful scraping off of the flesh, rather than a frenzied attack. But what did this bizarre ritual signify? Could the defleshing of the skull have been a punishment, as head shaving during the Iron Age was sometimes thought to be?
We have some evidence quite often of young people where the heads have been shaved as a punitive act. It's a highly visible thing to do, and shaming the head, because the head is regarded as the most important part of the body, if you shame the head, then you're shaming the entire person.
But how does this seemingly barbaric act fit into the picture of civilized Roman Britain? Miranda leaves the skull with Simon, so he can continue his forensic analysis. Returning to the scene of the crime, St. Albans, Miranda wants to see if she can put any more pieces of the jigsaw puzzle into place. By 200 AD, the Romans were well established across Britain. The thriving settlement of Verulamium, now St. Albans, boasted an elaborate bathhouse, a theatre, a temple, and a marketplace selling goods imported from the rest of the empire. The better off lived in villas decorated with beautiful mosaics and boasting underfloor heating. It could hardly be considered a savage place.
So I've been finding out about this strange goings-on at St. Albans, but we have to remember that we're actually here in a major Roman city. I'm standing here in an enormous theatre, where there would have been great public gatherings with Roman things going on, and over here is the forum, the main marketplace and meeting place of a Roman town. Across here behind me, there would have been an enormous triangular temple. So we have to remember that what's odd about what we've been looking at with this head, this skull, is that it's going on in this very, very Roman town, and you don't expect to find things like that, you know, decapitated heads placed in pits in the middle of a Roman city.
A short trip across St. Albans to the exact site of the skull's discovery may provide some answers. In order to get to the bottom of this mystery, Miranda needs to go up, to get a bird's-eye view of the burial place in relation to the thriving Roman city.
Well, there's very little that we can see of ancient Verulamium. As you can see, it's all buried under sort of housing estates and new buildings. But under this group of houses here, we've got the early temple, the mausoleum, and a very important temple of the 1st century AD. Then if we go further down towards the valley, right facing me is the actual site where the skull in the pit was found.
So the skull wasn't dumped just anywhere. It was buried near the site of a substantial complex of religious buildings just outside the town.
Well, of course, the temple was in its own precinct, a very big precinct. And then the entrance through this enclosure was just beyond those cars.
I see.
Really almost on the edge of the hill.
Yeah, so quite a commanding site, actually.
Oh,
isn't
very,
it?
because we're overlooking the site of the Roman town down in the valley there. It's very... When you were in the middle of the town, you would have looked up and you would have seen this temple.
Would have been on the skyline,
there on the
wouldn't it?
skyline,
Yes,
yes.
yes.
Other intriguing objects dating from the same period found within the temple complex confirm Miranda's suspicions. Among them are Roman face pots, but with a crucial difference.
On our site, the faces had nearly all been cut out, almost entirely removed. Yes. If you look at this one, you've got the ear there.
Away, yes.
Just the edge of the eye there, but the face corresponding to that. Almost,
actually
defleshed,
if you like.
Yes. Almost as if they'd gone round with an apple corer or something and removed the face.
Oh, that's weird.
And this happened over and over again in the with the face pots from the other pits.
That's quite odd.
Yes.
This strikes Miranda as more than just a coincidence.
So it almost looks as though we've got a kind of analogy between the skull and the face pots, that both have been defleshed and damaged and deliberately sort of destroyed, if you like.
Stranger still are 3 skeletons, probably female, buried at the entrance to the temple complex.
And these are middle-aged women, are they?
They're varying ages. One of them seems to have been quite young. One of them was maybe 50, that sort of age, and one sort of fairly middle-aged.
Yeah, I see.
Some of which showed signs of physical imperfection.
It's tempting to say that these women were selected and perhaps killed.
And they were put there really to guard the entrance into the enclosure.
But only on one side. Was there anything on the other side?
On the other side, there was a very small pit, a tiny little pit, with nothing in it at all, apart from just this one brooch.
The brooch was decorated with 6 concentric circles, representing 3 sets of eyes.
So one side of the entrance, you've got these 3 women. On the other side, you've got this sort of talisman or amulet with 3 pairs of staring, open eyes.
That's very weird, isn't it?
Yes.
For Miranda, the more she finds out, the less clear the picture becomes. The proximity of the sacred site, the suggestion that the skull was displayed, the symbolism of the pots and the other burials, it seems to be pointing towards a ritual killing. Back in Portsmouth, Simon's forensic examination of the skull has revealed something that may have a crucial bearing on the case. He's found some evidence of damage, this time to the base of the skull.
We can see here, in this area here, this is just where the top of the spine joins the skull. And we can see this is all broken away.
Oh, yes.
Difficult to be sure of the interpretation of this, but it's just the kind of thing you tend to see if you're mounting a skull on a pole.
So after being decapitated and defleshed, the youth's head might have been rammed onto a pole for all to see. That could indeed be interpreted as an act of punishment. But once again, the teeth provide a vital clue, giving a different picture.
We can see here that the enamel is in pristine condition. Now, in bodies exposed to the elements, you tend quite quickly to get cracking and flaking away of the enamel.
Oh, I see.
So that would suggest that it was exposed only for a fairly short amount of time, or it may even have been exposed in an indoor environment rather than sort of fully out in the elements.
So the head may have been displayed inside the temple as a sacred object, rather than outside as a warning to others.
So the evidence, all in all, is consistent, perhaps, with this head being placed in a temple and looked at and venerated indoors.
Yes, I think there are a number of lines of evidence that support the idea that it was put on a stake and it was some sort of object of veneration.
With the final piece of the puzzle in place, Miranda has now got the full picture of what happened to the youth.
If one takes all that evidence together, you've got a pretty sort of gruesome vignette, really, haven't you, of what went on? You know, the killing, the defleshing, display, and then the final deposition.
Yes.
Right on the doorstep of the civilized world of Roman Britain, this savage and forbidden act of sacrifice took place.
I think it's interesting that it's occurring in the Roman period at a time when this kind of ritual activity would have been frowned upon by the Roman authorities. And I suspect that if we're dealing with a sacrificial ritual, then it's the response to a great crisis, perhaps a famine or crop failure, disease, that kind of thing.
The seemingly barbaric ritual may have been a sacred act, a sacrifice of thanks, or even a desperate plea for help. Far from a victim of punishment or murder, this boy was chosen as a messenger, sent to the other world to commune with the gods. In 1994, in the dark and gloomy crypt of this Hungarian church, a priest made an amazing discovery. Hundreds of beautifully decorated coffins were found, and in them, mummies, remarkably preserved by the climatic conditions of the vault.
When they first opened the coffins, they expected to find skeletons. They were absolutely shocked when a significant proportion of these people were so beautifully mummified.
Their faces are fascinating to see, but more remarkable still is that here we have mummies that could one day change medical history.
The body of this 95-year-old woman could be a stepping stone to fighting a disease which is killing millions of people today.
Anthropologist Mark Spiegelman is on a quest to get to the bottom of this ancient mystery. What is the secret of the mummies from the crypt? The river Danube carves its path across Eastern Europe. It flows through the Hungarian capital Budapest and the nearby town of Vats. And the parish church in Vats' main square is where our story begins. Father Józef Zawitz tends to the daily priestly duties just as he did a decade ago when, during routine church renovation, a structural problem was discovered. Close examination of the exterior wall, directly beneath the steeple, revealed some alarmingly large cracks. Mysteriously, the thick, solid walls sounded hollow in one section. The bricks were knocked through, revealing stone steps descending into darkness. Father Zawitz went down to investigate. It was the entrance to the old crypts, which had not been used since 1838. The priest went on into the shadows, not knowing what he would find. He was about to make an incredible discovery. Stacked one on top of the other from floor to ceiling were over 300 beautifully painted coffins. Detailed inscriptions dated the interred to the 18th and 19th centuries. When local archaeologists opened up the coffins, they were met with a shocking sight. Most contained not skeletons, but mummies. Their ghoulish faces, now contorted in death, are startlingly well preserved. Hands, although dry and shriveled, have veins protruding and fingernails still intact. A stash of mummified bodies like these is a treasure trove to Australian anthropologist Mark Spiegelman. He is an authority on ancient diseases and pioneer in extracting ancient DNA. So as not to miss out on this unique opportunity, Mark has come to Hungary to investigate these mummies for himself.
It's amazing because you can see the real person. The level of preservation is just stunning. And you realize, I mean, this is not just a mummy, this is a person.
The stunning preservation wasn't intentional. These are accidental mummies, created by the constant temperature and through draft of dry air in the crypt into which they were sealed almost 200 years ago. But there was another essential ingredient, which Mark identifies on a trip to the museum in Vats, where the coffins are kept.
This is a beautifully preserved coffin. It's actually of a 2-year-old child. And maybe this contains one of the clues as to why the Vats bodies did mummify. These coffins were made of pine, and many of the bodies, in fact nearly all, were sitting on some pine shavings. Now, pine is a very interesting product. It contains a terpenoid which is antibacterial and has antifungal actions. And this may be the reason why the Vats mummies are so beautifully preserved.
Most of the mummies are now stored in the Hungarian Natural History Museum in Budapest, under the care of archaeologist Ildikó Pap. Here, Ildikó and her team are studying the mummies in detail, a rare opportunity to piece together a picture of life in Vats 200 years ago.
They are very interesting for the anthropology because from the remains we can recover the life of the people who used to live in the small town of Vats. You can speak about what they ate, what was the stature of them, how heavy they were, and they offer an excellent opportunity to figure out what kind of diseases they had in the past.
After their discovery, Ildikó set about a thorough investigation of the mummies. And it was her suspicion of tuberculosis as the likely cause of death in one of them that prompted Ildikó to call on Mark's expertise. He conducted a thorough forensic examination of this mummy to check for the presence of TB.
This is a very famous mummy, in fact, because it's the first. It's the one Ildikó Pap first suspected of having TB when she did a CT scan. And we found, when we biopsied this mummy, that he did have TB. He had open TB in his lung. And as a result of the study on this single person, the whole Hungarian mummy project developed.
The Hungarian Mummy Project was set up in 1997 to investigate in detail this amazing phenomenon, the survival of TB DNA in ancient cadavers. Pure, unadulterated TB, free from contamination by antibiotics and modern chemicals. These mummies could become vital in the fight against TB today.
We can learn what this bacteria was like 200 years ago. We know about disease today. What's the change? And maybe by learning how disease changed, we can also, on the basis that we have to know our enemy, learn how to treat it.
Tuberculosis devastated Europe during the 18th and 19th centuries as populations became increasingly industrialized. Huge numbers of people lived in close contact with each other in highly polluted environments. Bacteria were easily passed around, and TB was a real killer. Symptoms included weight loss, fever, chest pains, and the coughing up of blood. The sufferer would also have an extremely pale complexion, hence the disease being known as the White Plague. A disease that's just as devastating today, killing 2 million people every year.
It is the biggest single killer that is due to a bacterium, and that is despite all the antibiotics. And in fact, it's becoming a bigger problem than ever because many of the cases now are multi-drug resistant. It means we haven't got a treatment anymore.
With 168 mummies at his disposal, Mark needs to whittle down the candidates for investigation. He heads to the local museum, where the articles found in the coffins are catalogued and stored. But rosaries, jewellery and other possessions aren't going to reveal much. More valuable treasure lies in the accounts written at the time.
One of the useful things about this whole collection is that we've got these wonderful records. For instance, one of the records is that of Shimon Antal, director of the School of the Deaf. He died 1808. He was 36 and he died spitting blood. Now that to me is a classic sign of tuberculosis.
In other cases, it is the physical appearance of the mummy itself that raises Mark's suspicions that there could be tuberculosis DNA present. As TB can cause severe bone deformity, this hideously misshapen figure is a prime example. Her compacted thorax and arthritic fingers immediately arouse Mark's suspicions.
And then there's this.
An X-ray reveals the severity of her deformity. Her S-shaped spine is completely contorted.
Show me the second again.
Yep, okay, yeah.
Is there anything to see here? There is a difference, look.
The X-rays also give them an idea about the effect of TB on the lungs.
I mean, I've never seen anything quite as gross as that. Look. Right, there's no question she had collapsed vertebra. There's no question she had TB.
So another mummy that might contain ancient TB DNA. As part of the initial investigation, Mark takes tissue samples, or biopsies, from 168 of the mummies to send for analysis in the UK.
These are all the samples we've taken since I've been here. And don't forget to give me a letter for customs. Yep. They won't accuse me of smuggling human remains out of Hungary without a license.
Despite traveling in a battered old suitcase, these pieces of 200-year-old mummies are going on a journey to the very cutting edge of medical research. Here, at the University College London, the samples are in the care of microbiologist Helen Donoghue, an expert in extracting DNA.
Oh, there's some. Oh yes, beautiful. Really are, amazingly.
Helen applies a complex process to extract the DNA from these 200-year-old tissue samples.
I end up with a solution which is full of DNA. It's going to be full of the human DNA from the individual. It's going to be full of DNA from any organisms from the environment. And if the individual had tuberculosis, I hope that there's also some TB DNA.
Once she's extracted the DNA, Helen will be able to check for any signs of TB. Amazingly, of the mummies that were tested, 55% show signs of TB. For Mark, this seems a very high proportion, given that they were living in a relatively healthy place.
It was a middle-class population, it was well-fed, it was well-housed, it enjoyed excellent air. What were the causes?
If Mark can answer this, he could be on the path to finding a modern cure for an ancient disease. Today, the local people of Vats walk the same cobbled streets as their forebears did, past the same churches where they worshipped, and they eat fresh produce bought from the same market square. Inspired by the discovery of 168 mummies in an ancient church crypt, anthropologist Mark Spiegelman is on a quest to find out why so many of them carried TB.
The tuberculosis epidemic during the Industrial Revolution was the result of bad diet, bad air, wars, all sorts of stresses. None of these were present in the Vats of our period. These people had a good diet, good air, no wars, no stress. Therefore, there had to be other reasons for why there was so much tuberculosis in this population. What were the causes? We believe there is genetics involved.
So in Vats 200 years ago, there were perhaps people who were genetically susceptible to TB. At the same time, given that TB is a highly infectious airborne disease, there must have been people who were genetically resistant to it.
Genes work in many ways, but basic thing is they produce something. It's usually a little protein. Now, with tuberculosis, the bacteria, in order to infect you, has got to take certain steps. It's got to get inside your cell. It's got to start producing toxins which kill that cell. So if you've got a protein which somehow blocks the entry of the bacteria, then you can't get infected.
So among the people of Vats, there were those who carried TB, but who also carried in their genetic makeup a protein that kept it at bay. Mark needs to find out which of the mummies were resistant to take him closer to his goal. Luckily for Mark, Vats' parish records document more than just births, marriages and deaths. They also give details of where people lived, in which streets, and what jobs they did. By detecting groups in which TB was killing some members and not others, Mark will then be able to focus his attention on the survivors, those who may possibly hold the key gene. Using the records, he and Ildiko have been able to put together one such family group. For example, in this family, 2 of them died of TB and 2 survived.
So that's Katie, and she...
Yeah, and she was 2.5-year-old when
Right.
she died, yeah.
1801, the father died 5 years later, 1806.
Yeah.
And when we found out 2 of them had TB, we're now interested in knowing why did not only 2 of them die from TB, but why didn't the other 2? They were all living together. They were eating together, at least 2 of them were sleeping together, probably all 4. So why only 2? And maybe there is a genetic reason for it, and that's what we're going to be looking for soon.
An ideal case would be someone who had caught TB, but whose body was able to fight it off. One mummy in particular has caught Mark's attention.
Now this is an interesting story. Anna Baron, who according to the dates written on the coffin, she was 95 at time of death.
Anna Biren was surrounded by people dying of TB, this highly contagious disease, but lived to a grand old age. Mark is beginning to get an inkling that she could be the crucial case he's been searching for.
She obviously didn't die of TB. Look at her, she's nice, plump. There's no reason to suspect that she died of any infection, and certainly not of TB. Other kids and people in this town at the same time were dying at the age of 5, 10, 15, 20 from TB. Why didn't she die? Why didn't it infect her?
This could be Mark's golden opportunity to find the remains of someone who had once contracted TB, but who had recovered from it, and unlock the genetic puzzle. Ildiko and Mark have arranged for an X-ray of Anna Biren's body at the local hospital.
Where's the taxi?
The 300-year-old passenger is chauffeured to the National Medical Center in Budapest. This shriveled, papery mummy must be a most macabre sight for the medical staff.
Can you center it on the chest? We're particularly interested in doing the chest X-ray because if there is TB there, that's the most likely spot. We're going to spot any signs of it on X-ray.
This way, Mark will be able to get a closer look at Anna Biren's lungs.
That's the end of the rib. You see, it's not easy.
Anna's chest X-ray is displayed on a computer monitor.
It looks like it's had a bit cut off.
Mark is looking for signs of calcification on the lungs. The body's natural response to many diseases, including TB, is to build up a hard shell of calcium salts around the infected area.
Costal cartilage somewhere. But this was the area where I thought there was a calcified nodule.
Evidence of a calcium deposit on Anna's lungs could indicate that she had suffered an infection, possibly TB.
See, just there, that's a calcified lymph node. You can see it's rounded. There is one piece there which looks very suspicious, and that's the one I feel we should be biopsying to see if it's got tuberculosis.
A biopsy is the removal of a small piece of tissue that can be taken away for closer study.
And we go through the diaphragm into the thoracic cavity.
An endoscope, a tiny camera on the end of a probe, can be inserted deep into the mummy to guide Mark to the right area.
So we're going to biopsy the pleura. See the biopsy forceps?
He needs to remove a piece of tissue from the exact spot on the lung where the X-ray showed a calcified lesion. This, together with the samples from the other areas of potential infection, such as the abdomen, will be sent to Helen Donoghue in London. If she can find any evidence of TB, Mark's investigation will have made immense progress. Things don't look good at first. Initial tests show no signs of TB DNA. The final sample is far more encouraging.
Right, well, the most important result is the one I've got here, this white spot. That shows we've got a positive result for TB DNA. That actually came from the left pleura, the lining of the left lung from Anna, and so I think she had a latent tuberculosis infection.
So Anna did have TB. In Anna, Mark has finally found what he's been looking for, an incidence of tuberculosis in someone who, unlike those around her, fought off the infection. He is convinced that she must have within her the vital gene that blocks the onslaught of TB.
What happened was, at the age of 5, let's say, she got infected. Her TB didn't flare up and kill her. She walled off the infection, and maybe for 90 years of her life, she carried the TB bug in her body. It didn't affect her, and it didn't infect her.
Despite contracting TB, Anna's body had been able to fight it off, because hidden in her genetic makeup was a natural resistance to the disease. If this gene can be isolated and replicated, the spread of TB worldwide could grind to a halt. This elderly lady could never have known her potential importance to future science.
Her future legacy could be that she could help us unravel the causes of TB and the genetic reasons why some people get killed by it and other people heal themselves without the aid of any modern medicines.
Mark's discovery of latent TB in Anna Beeren's mummified body could be the first amazing step towards a cure. His aim is to identify other examples within the mummy cache of people who'd had TB but who didn't die from it. Other specialists will isolate the rare magic gene that prevented the onslaught of TB in these people. The hope would be to reproduce this gene and create a long-lasting and effective treatment of TB. Mark believes that the future is genetic medicine and that the Hungarian mummies will play a vital part. Archaeologists excavating the site of a settlement near the Dutch coast were intrigued to discover hundreds of skeletal remains of newborn babies.
When looking at so many children's burials in one place, of course, some of the first questions are, is this evidence for infanticide?
Were these the innocent victims of war, a rebel uprising, or were they left to die in a time of great need? Archaeologist Liesbeth Smits worked on the original excavation of the Roman cemetery. She has decided to return to the site to reinvestigate the mystery of these infant deaths.
18% of the whole population died under the age of 1 year. In fact, almost half of the population died under the age of 20 years.
Using the latest forensic techniques and expert analysis, Lisbeth is determined to discover what happened here. Valkenburg, Holland. 2,000 years ago, this bleak windswept coastline represented the furthest northern outpost of the Roman Empire on mainland Europe. It was under the rule of the famously insane Emperor Caligula when the Roman Empire spread from the Nile in North Africa across the Middle East and most of continental Europe through what is now Spain, France and Germany till it reached the distant shore of present-day Holland. At this time, Valkenburg was a community made up of native people, as well as a small garrison of Roman soldiers. When in modern times archaeologists came to excavate this site, they unearthed a cemetery that held amazing secrets. They discovered over 450 burial remains. Of this number, 130 were skeletal inhumations or burials. The rest were cremations. But it was the age profile of the dead that astonished the archaeologists. About 100 of the total remains discovered, almost a fifth, turned out to be the skeletal remains of children.
For us, it's really strange to look at that kind of phenomenon. And I want to find out what could have been the influence on this high mortality rate.
What happened here to cause so many premature deaths? Who were these babies? Were they native children or Romans? Did they die en masse at the hands of an enemy? Did they succumb to disease? Or were they the victims of mass infanticide? The first thing Lisbeth wants to do is take a look at the bones for herself. She heads off to Amersfoort, where the human remains from the Valkenburg cemetery are kept. The collection, amounting to thousands of bones, is stored in a cool climatic warehouse. What's extraordinary about Valkenburg is that so many baby bones have survived. Usually the tiny bones of infants disintegrate in the ground over time. She pays particular attention to the remains of the children. She makes a meticulous and detailed examination of their long bones and teeth to find out exactly how old these children were when they died. The results are surprising.
There are about 100 children's graves, and from that number, most of them are the graves of newly borns. Almost 1/5 of the populations that died in the first year they were born. And that's really extraordinary.
Of the 114 children buried at Valkenburg, 90 died under the age of a year. What had happened here? Lisbeth now looks at the bones for an explanation as to why so many died so young.
I studied the bones of the whole skeleton, of course, to look for any signs of disease. But that's most of the time you can't see anything which can give you a clue to the cause of death.
Because these children died so young, there wouldn't have been enough time for disease to affect the bones.
It will take a long time to affect the skeleton. And when it's a disease which kills quickly, you won't see it on the skeleton at all. So from that, I didn't have a lot of evidence for the cause of death.
There are no signs of disease, and at first glance, there appear to be no signs of violence or trauma. X-rays of the bones confirm that these children didn't die a violent death. What was it that killed them? In search of more clues, Lisbeth returns to the site of the original excavation. The cemetery site lies alongside a modern highway. In Roman times, this was the main route to the fortress settlement of Praetorium Agrippinae. If Lisbeth is to find out why these children died, then some detail about life here in Roman times may shed some light. She meets Roman historian and anthropologist Karen Wall. She has studied the site in depth and may be able to shed some light on this bizarre mystery.
It's very hard
hard to imagine it now when you see all the traffic and where we're standing, but this was actually the edge of the Roman Empire in those days.
The site was in use during a period of over 200 years, dating back to about AD 40, when the Romans first arrived. The occupying force would have step by step begun mixing with the locals for business and for pleasure. Valkenburg became a vibrant community of Roman soldiers, farmers, and coastal traders.
Of course, from before the Roman period, there would be rural settlements in this area. The Romans coming to the fort would have brought their families, there would have been traders, there would have been the natives who come and settle alongside in the hope of doing business with the fort.
Of course.
The soldiers themselves would have gradually had native families.
But who was buried in this cemetery? Were they local or were they Romans? The way the dead were buried provides a clue.
What you're finding right from the beginning of the fort, the establishing of the fort in the mid-1st century, right through to the end of the 2nd century, cremation is very much the most popular ritual.
It stays there the whole period.
It the whole period.
Yes.
There are differences within that ritual, but the general pattern is cremation.
The Romans then favoured cremation as a funereal rite. So it's almost certain then that the cremations on this site were of Roman citizens. But why were there 41 adult skeletal burials here? What's intriguing is that they don't seem to have been treated with any respect.
The adults, what's very interesting is they don't seem to have been buried with any really due care or any proper ritual. They just seem to have been thrown into shallow pits, sometimes on their stomach, or sometimes on their back, in all directions, no clear
formal
orientation. So it's very unusual, and it's very unclear for us what that actually means, but it's a very small group towards the end of the 2nd century.
Presumably, these adult burials were not of Romans. They may have been the dumped bodies of criminals. But the fact that these few burials dated from a particular time period suggests a connection with a specific event, perhaps a revolt, and that these were insurgents killed by the Roman occupiers. Would such an insurgence explain the deaths of the children buried at Valkenburg?
The Roman period itself was a period of enormous instability in certain periods, and sometimes the questions are asked, are we looking at violence? Is there any evidence for conflict in the area? Ironically, being so near a fort would suggest that it was a fairly safe area to live. We actually have very little evidence in the graves to suggest that there was conflict. There was no suggestion for wounds or death in battle.
It was something else that caused the demise of so many youngsters. But were they Roman, and if they were, why weren't they cremated?
What you see as a general pattern here, but also in other cemeteries, is that the children below the age of 18, and particularly infants and neonatals, they were always buried. They were never cremated.
But why so many? Karen has her suspicions.
When looking at so many children's burials in one place, of course, some of the first questions are, is this an evidence for infanticide?
Infanticide was widespread in Roman society. One grisly case was in Ashkelon on the southern coast of Israel, where archaeologists excavating around a late Roman, early Byzantine brothel discovered the remains of nearly 100 newborn baby boys. They showed no signs of disease or skeletal malformation, suggesting infanticide rather than a catastrophe. These boys may have been discarded in favor of girls, who would become the next generation of courtesans in the brothel. Some other ancient cultures would sacrifice their children. The Aztecs would sacrifice children to the gods as a plea for good harvests. The Inuits of Greenland left babies out to perish in the snow and ice when starvation threatened the community. Could it be that the Valkenburg children were also deliberately killed during a time of crisis? The manner of these babies' burials does not suggest abandonment. They were not discarded or cast into a sewer. They were interred carefully, some even with food and toys, for their journey into the afterlife.
We do find in a lot of the burials here that they did have grave gifts, just like some of the adults. Pots where possibly food and drink. Even in one of the baby graves, there was found a little drinking bottle, which is, quite a sad thing to find, really, even now.
It's obvious that these babies weren't done away with deliberately. Their deaths were huge tragedies. But what was it that was killing them?
The only thing which is left to do is look at the components of the bones, to analyze the chemical elements of the bones and see if that can give any evidence of what happened.
A high-tech analysis of the chemical components of the bones may reveal not only what killed these babies, but also what could have played a part in the downfall of the Roman Empire. Archaeologist Lisbeth Smits is trying to find out why such a high proportion of babies were buried in the Roman cemetery at Valkenburg, Holland. Having studied the bones, Lisbeth has ruled out disease or violence as cause of death. She now wants to analyze the chemical makeup of the bone material to see if that might hold some clues. She calls on one of Holland's most eminent scientists, Frederik de Wolf, Professor of Clinical and Forensic Toxicology. He is often asked to help crack modern murder cases, but today he has come to help solve this ancient mystery. He has arranged for isotope analysis to be made on the infant bones at Leiden Hospital. This cutting-edge technique will reveal what chemicals were absorbed into their bodies.
What you have done so far is to analyze the bones which were taken from the graves of children who died at a very young age or were stillborn. And what we found was that the concentration of lead in the bone of these children was very, very high.
The first thing Professor de Wolf needed to do was compare the quantity of lead in the Roman babies with that of stillborn babies from the local area today.
What we did is to analyze lead.
He takes Lisbeth through the astonishing results he's found.
Because the lead content in those Roman children, there was a lead content which is about 50 times as much as in contemporary children.
Could lead, a very toxic substance, have caused these infant deaths?
Well, lead is a very nasty poison. It can cause a wide range of complaints of pathology.
Lead affects almost every part of the body: the kidneys, the nervous and reproductive systems. Anemia, epilepsy, kidney malfunction and insanity are among the symptoms. It may have affected the sanity of emperors such as Caligula, who is thought to have suffered from encephalitis, a disease that many believe can be caused by lead poisoning. It's particularly harmful to the developing brains of fetuses and young children and can cause them seizure, comas, and ultimately death. The use of lead can be dated as far back as 8,000 years. Easier to extract from rock, it was favoured because it melted at low temperatures and was easily malleable. And in Roman times, lead was everywhere. The Romans used it for water pipes and to fashion all sorts of everyday objects, kitchen utensils, pots and pans. It was even added to makeup and to food. Although some people suspected the dangers of lead, most were happy to use it regardless, unaware that they were slowly poisoning themselves. Although this widespread use of lead in Roman times is well documented, possible evidence of lead poisoning in this area has come as a surprise to the experts.
We know that people in the Roman Empire, and especially in Rome itself, were heavily exposed to lead. But we never knew that lead exposure was so high in this part, the northern part of the Roman Empire.
Professor de Wolf isn't convinced that the babies ingested all this lead during their brief lives, and considers another explanation. Was lead absorbed into the bones from the soil in which they were buried?
It could also be that the lead in these bone samples was concentrated from lead in the soil surrounding the bones.
It's possible that the cemetery soil had a high lead content, and lead wasn't to blame for the babies' deaths after all.
The structure of human bone is such that it easily concentrates lead from the environment.
It works like a kind of sponge.
Yeah, that's
Yes,
right, exactly,
yeah.
exactly.
Professor de Wolf now organizes analysis of the soil in which the children were buried. He wants to compare the lead type found in the bones with that found in the soil. The results of the study are conclusive.
What results we got back were really fascinating. We were thrilled because it clearly demonstrated that the lead which was present in the bone of these children was from a different source than from the Dutch soil.
The lead definitely got into the babies' bodies during their lifetime, more than likely through the mother. However, the mothers would surely have been unaware of the harm they were doing. They wouldn't have noticed the symptoms of lead poisoning in their own bodies until later in life. 90% of any lead consumed by an adult will leave their body as natural wastage. Children's bodies, on the other hand, will take up about half of what they ingest because of growth and development. Unborn babies are even more vulnerable. Tragically, the children were being slowly poisoned by the lead in their mothers' bodies, both before and after they were born.
They also used lead, for instance, as a preservative to food products, as stewed food. And they used it to sweeten wine and to preserve wine with it.
Lisbeth's next line of inquiry is to explore the idea that lead in the wine and food was to blame.
I want to hear specialist advice about food and food preparation in Roman times, because it seems that the ingestion of lead by way of the food chain might be a serious threat to the health of the people.
She's come to Amsterdam's Museum of Antiquities. She hopes Roman ethnographer and food expert René van Beek will be able to shed some light. Surrounded by the kind of pots and utensils that would have been used by the citizens of Valkenburg, Lisbeth explains what it is she needs to know.
We think that the food is a very important factor in the lead uptake by the mother of these children. So can you tell me something about the food the Romans used and how the lead could have been absorbed during life, during pregnancy, by these infants, by these fetuses?
René believes that it wasn't really what the people were eating that was to blame, as their diet was extremely healthy. It was more likely to be the dishes that they used every day.
For example, when you see the small beakers they used for drinking wine and for these buckets they used for getting water, you see that all these things are made of bronze. And, well, in bronze, of course, there is a lot of lead, which was toxic.
Nice.
The Romans were cooking with bronze pots, eating off bronze plates, drinking from bronze cups, and all the time they were soaking up lead. But they sometimes made even more concentrated contact.
For example, you see some points in this small plate. For example, here, you see it was repaired. It's an ancient repair which was made with lead, real lead, not solder made with lead, but real lead.
Pure lead.
Pure lead.
Oh.
Yeah. So that meant that when people were using this plate for preparing their food, for eating, etc., the lead was in direct contact with the food.
But they were getting another daily dose of lead by another means. An essential part of Roman cuisine was a syrup called defrutum or sapa, a sweetener and preservative. It was made by boiling down unfermented grape juice to produce a sweet concentrate. Lead kettles were deliberately used as the lead enhanced the sweetness. The acidity of the grapes would also have helped the lead leach from the pot into the syrup.
And when they cooked this wine in these bronze cooking pans, then you can see that there is, of course, a lot of lead coming from the object into the wine. And lead made the thing sweet.
This highly toxic syrup, defrutum, was then added to all manner of food and drink. And the widely used cookbook of 3rd century Apicius even called for defrutum to be added to as many as a fifth of his recipes. Cook tuna fillet, mash tuna fillet together with dates, defrutum, fry veal in olive oil until well done, mix raisins, wine, defrutum. Defrutum was also used as a preservative, enabling foodstuff to be conserved and distributed to the troops across the empire. This highly toxic substance was infiltrating the cream of Roman society, causing, among other things, infertility and high infant mortality. Some scholars believe that lead poisoning was a contributory factor to the collapse of Roman power.
Well, we know that Romans, through the whole empire, were heavily exposed to lead. Especially those who could afford a lot of wine were heavily exposed. And we may conclude from the findings obtained so far that this may have played a very important role also in the decline of the Roman Empire.
But not everyone concurs with this theory. Rennie agrees that the amount of lead in Roman life was extremely dangerous, but remains uncertain as to exactly what effect it had.
Of course there was a lot of lead, there was too much lead, so there was a too big risk, you can say. And I agree with that for sure. On the other hand, it is always risk as well to say that the decline and fall of the Roman Empire was because of the lead. But for sure, there was too much lead. That's a conclusion we can draw.
It's now clear to Lisbeth that lead was everywhere in Roman life, in water, wine, food eaten from bronze plates, and even in a nursing mother's milk. The babies of Valkenburg didn't stand a chance.
All the evidence I have now points to the fact that it's very probable that the lead poisoning could have been the major cause of death of these infants. This lead would have been ingested during pregnancy and was transmitted by the mother to the child.
The deaths of the Valkenburg children were totally unpremeditated. Whether or not their demise can be linked to the greater demise of the Roman Empire is still a matter for conjecture. But what we are certain of is that they were the unwitting victims of a privileged way of life. The nightmare of Valkenburg was that, while the mothers enjoyed a rich and varied diet, they never knew that it was loaded with poison, a poison so deadly that it took their children from them and never gave them answers as to why. Archaeologists excavating a grave in a colonial cemetery in New England came across a startling discovery. On opening the coffin, they saw that the skeleton inside had bizarrely been arranged into a skull and crossbones.
They removed his legs, they decapitated his skull, and they reburied him.
Who could have done this, and why?
We were totally amazed as to what we saw. We have never seen anything like this before.
Was this an act of vengeance or superstition? The hunt is on to unearth a dark practice of colonial New England.
Vampire?
To figure out why somebody returned to the grave to carry out this bizarre act of mutilation.
The question is, what was going on back in the 1800s that made them do this?
In 1990, the peace of the sleepy New England community of Jewett City, Connecticut, was broken by a truly shocking discovery. Local children were playing on the steep banks of a commercial gravel pit on the outskirts of town. As they slid down the slopes, they dislodged a skull that rolled out after them. The two terrified kids were convinced they had disturbed a modern-day murder scene. Work stopped in the quarry and the police were called, but when they examined the skull, they could immediately see it was far too old to be a recent homicide. So, Connecticut State archaeologist Professor Nick Bellantoni was called in to investigate. He has excavated over 100 graves around New England. But this was to be his strangest case yet. Bellantoni and his team immediately rushed to the scene. What they had unearthed was a family burial plot dating back to the 1700s and 1800s. There were over 25 graves that had been left undisturbed for over 150 years. But the graveyard was in danger. As the gravel pit was eroding, the graves were about to collapse over the edge, so Bellantoni and his team had to excavate immediately. At first they found skeleton after skeleton laid out in the expected anatomical position, but the next grave was to be different.
Then we got to this one grave where we opened it up and we saw on the coffin lid they had taken brass tacks and hammered the initials JB and under that 55.
No one was prepared for what came next.
When we lifted the board of that, then we saw something totally unexpected. We saw a burial that had been rearranged, where the legs had been crossed over the chest and the head had been removed to another position.
The arrangement formed a skull and crossbones, classically a symbol that signified death and adopted by pirates on their flags to strike fear in their enemies. What was the symbol doing in a rural graveyard?
We were totally amazed as to what we saw. We have never seen anything like this before. And it was so different, it puzzled us immediately as to what, in fact, we were seeing.
Someone must have come back to the burial after the body had decomposed, perhaps years after death when all that was left was bone, to deliberately mutilate whoever this was. But why?
What I'd really like to know right now is why this individual was rearranged in the grave, why they went back in, and what happened here.
Bellantoni's first move is to look for any clues on JB's skeletal remains. He makes the 400-mile journey from Jewett City to Washington, D.C. Here, at the National Museum of Health and Medicine, he enlists the help of forensic anthropologist Paul Sledzik. Bellantoni hopes an examination of the skeleton may reveal how JB met his end.
What we'll do, we'll just lay him out.
After spending 150 years with his bones disturbed, JB is now laid in the correct anatomical position. Sledzik can instantly tell that JB was male.
And this is a very typical male skull. He's got a very large mastoid process here, which is that bony protuberance behind your ear. It's got big brow ridge areas right here. So I'm very confident this is a male skeleton we're looking at here.
By looking at the wear on the pelvic bone, Sledzik can estimate how old the man was at death.
If you look at the age, we're going to actually look at the pubic symphysis, which is this part of the pelvis bone right here. And we'll actually look at this face, and I can just kind of eyeball this and just knowing enough about it. I'm putting this guy in the age range of 45 to 55 years of age.
So this could explain the number 55 on the coffin lid. It was his age when he died. He then looks at the rest of the body for any clues to the kind of existence he led.
Once we start looking at pathology, a few things hit me right off the bat. He's lived a hard life. He's got some pretty severe traumatic event to the right shoulder. All this bony growth right here, if you compare it to a normal, you can see just the difference there, pretty significant.
That's quite extensive.
He also had an infection of the lower part of the left leg down here in the tibia, all these raised areas. Probably an open infected wound at the time of his death.
All these life stress injuries reveal how he made a living. JB was a farmer, the most common way of life in colonial New England. A tough outdoor existence living off the land, which over 150 years later can still be seen in his bones, especially his back.
Most of the major joints in the vertebrae have these bony protuberances, which is osteoarthritis, which leads me to lead again that kind of hard life. A lot of heavy lifting, probably had some back pain.
None of these injuries would have killed JB, but Sledzik has spotted something.
You did notice, just looking over the ribs quickly earlier, but you can pick this up here. See this whitish area, Nick, on the inside surface of the rib right here? The fact that these are in the left ribs and the upper part of the left ribs is highly indicative of tuberculosis.
The likely cause of death is identified. JB's infection was so chronic, it had eaten into the bone.
So this is very positive evidence that he actually had tuberculosis.
Oh yeah, there's no question that he had TB. Probably had it for a period of time before, maybe several weeks, several months, but he was certainly suffering from TB when he died.
JB fell victim to the single biggest killer of adults in colonial New England. It ravaged communities, killing 1 in 7 people. Historical accounts show that JB's community of Jewett City was hit hard by this epidemic. For them, it was known as consumption, for it appeared to consume the sufferer's entire being. JB would have got weaker day by day, bedridden, wasting away, coughing up blood, until finally the life drained from him. But why then did somebody come back to disturb his grave? For Bill and Tony, the mystery has only deepened.
I know now that JB had a really difficult life, that he was a hardworking farmer, that he had various injuries throughout his body, that he had tuberculosis. What I really need to do now is try to find out what life was like back then and what their belief systems was and why they would have done what they did to JB.
Bell and Tony has come to a living history museum where houses dating from the 1800s have been authentically reconstructed to momentarily step into JB's world.
We're here in the old Sturbridge village in Sturbridge, Massachusetts, and what we have is a really an excellent recreation of what style JB would have lived in terms of his family in these crowded farmhouses. And you know, we can anticipate that JB had a fairly large family. And that family had to be housed in just a certain number of bedrooms. So you had a lot of people maybe sleeping together in the same beds, basically in the same rooms with crowded conditions. And so those that had the tuberculosis were probably coughing and bringing up and communicating that disease, transmitting it to other family members very rapidly.
2 graves discovered just meters away from JB's bring the devastating spread of TB through families startlingly to life. One contained the body of a teenager, NB. The other, a 45-year-old woman, IB, almost certainly his wife and child. Both had died young, probably after JB transmitted his disease to them. They would have been living in fear, as this was a time when there was no knowledge of germs or viruses. TB had yet to be defined by the medical world.
We can only imagine how scared these people were over such a disease. It was running from family member to family member, and they had no knowledge of how it was spread. And so they had to try to explain this. Why were people getting sick? Why were people dying? And maybe sometimes when the medical profession, when the physicians could not help them with reliable information, you know, sometimes maybe they looked toward superstitious or maybe even spiritual answers as to why this was going on.
This new line of inquiry has brought Bell and Tony to a cemetery in Rhode Island, 50 miles from JB's grave. He has enlisted the help of Dr. Michael Bell. He has spent 20 years researching the superstitions and folklore of New England. Bell has taken him to an eerie, overgrown subplot to show him a gravestone he believes may provide a fascinating clue.
These are small family plots from the early 1800s, and they're all scattered, overgrown. It's not been taken care of.
Something which might make the link between consumption and a dark superstition of colonial New England.
This is great. This is really something, Nick. I don't know what you're going to think. No, it's not that one. Okay. Oh, there it is. Look.
Bill and Tony has no idea what to expect.
Simon Whipple.
Look at the inscription on the bottom there. Can you read that?
Although consumption's vampire grasp had seized thy mortal frame.
What do you think?
Vampire? A connection with tuberculosis and vampirism?
Yeah. Amazing.
Wow.
The discovery may suggest something incredible. JB was believed to be a vampire. But how could this explain the bizarre rearrangement of his bones? Archaeologist Nick Bellantoni is trying to get to the bottom of a mystery. Why was the skeleton of a 19th century tuberculosis victim disturbed and rearranged into a skull and crossbones years after his death? The trail has brought him to a cemetery 50 miles from where the skeleton was found. With the help of folklorist Michael Bell, he has discovered an inscription on a gravestone which offers a crucial clue.
Although consumption's vampire grasp had seized thy mortal frame. Vampire?
They have found the only known headstone in America bearing the word vampire, a word used for the undead, people who have died but raised from the grave to feed upon the living. Its association with the word consumption is the key, as this was the term used for tuberculosis, the very disease which killed JB.
Amazing.
Yeah. Did they think a vampire was spreading consumption or tuberculosis?
I'm not sure, but I can understand why they would link the two. Because when you die of consumption, you waste away, and in a sense you take on the appearance of a walking corpse, like a vampire would be. And also, since you're wasting away, it's like something's draining the life out of you, something mysterious or unknown. It's sapping your very life force.
Crucially, the gravestone dates to 1841, the same time period as JB's life.
But to me, it makes the link between what happened to JB and the evidence that he had tuberculosis, which is what they called consumption.
Exactly. Wow, that really is incredible.
So Bellantoni has the pieces of a puzzle. The rearranged skeleton of a man. Evidence that TB was spreading through his family. And a gravestone linking this disease to a belief in vampires. But the pieces are still not fitting together. What could the link with vampires be? The belief in the undead originated in Europe in the 16th century. Their folklore spoke of the dead raising from the grave to feed on a sleeping victim, the flesh hanging from the bone, blood still pumping through their body, fingernails like claws. Horror movies like the 1922 classic Nosferatu took these real beliefs and reinvented them, defining forever the vampire as a supernatural horror villain.
What we've uncovered is not what we think of in terms of vampires. It's not Bela Lugosi, it's not Dracula. That was a fiction. What this is what people really believed and what they really had to cope with in terms of death and disease. What I still don't understand is the nature of the crossbones and how that fits into this vampire folk belief.
Folklorist Michael Bell has been searching town halls of New England for any further clues to support the vampire theory.
Looking for town council records.
In the eerie vaults of the small New England town of Cumberland, their records document the affairs of weekly town meetings dating back to the 1700s. One strange entry in a record book has caught his attention.
This is February 8, 1796. Listen to this. Mr. Stephen Staples of Cumberland appeared before this council and prayed that he might have liberty granted unto him to dig up the body of his daughter, Abigail Staples, single woman deceased, in order to try an experiment on Lavinia Chase, wife of Stephen Chase.
So they actually went to the town to get permission to dig into her body.
Yeah, to dig up the body, but officially sanctioned.
Wow.
I mean, you would think it was something that would happen clandestine.
Right.
You know, on the sly or out of the public view.
This is socially and politically approved.
So it's accepted.
Yeah.
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 It may be that whoever dug up the body of JB, like Stephen Staples, had the town's blessing to do so. The word experiment suggests that this was a desperate last attempt, perhaps an experiment to save the life of someone who was dying. But what this experiment was remains a mystery.
So we know now, based on this document, that people were in fact exhuming burials. But what exactly is this experiment? Could it be the experiment is to look for the evidence of being a vampire?
I think that might be the first choice. It was probably looking for the heart and checking to see if it had what they would call fresh blood, that is liquefied blood. And if it did, they would decide that was the one, and they would burn the heart.
Back in Washington, D.C., forensic anthropologist Paul Sledzik is slotting the vampire theory into place.
We've got a slide of a body decomposing in the grave. This is about a couple years' worth of decomposition.
His grisly collection of slides document the stages the body goes through after death.
You can see the chest is much larger than it would be normally. So if you were to go and press on this, there'd be fluids that would come out, and those are just all the body fluids that are decomposing inside the chest cavity and in the lower abdomen.
If somebody did open a coffin shortly after death to look for evidence of being a vampire, they would have been met by a shocking sight that could have reinforced their belief in vampirism.
Let's focus down on just a hand. This is a hand from a body that's decomposing. What's obvious here, the skin looks pretty normal, but you see the fingernails a little bit different in appearance.
Just after death.
Right, about a day or two after death. And again, the skin looks normal, but the nails look a little bit different. And if you recall from some of the vampire accounts from Europe, they talk about fingernails growing after death, they talk about hair growing after death, they talk about old skin falling away and a new fresh skin emerging under it.
Does that happen?
Sure, here's the next phase, about a week after death or so, week to 10 days in a temperate environment. Look, it looks like the fingernails have grown.
The fingernails appear to have grown, but in fact the skin has dried and receded from the nail, giving the eerie impression of claws.
And what's actually happening is that people are misinterpreting standard evidence of decomposition.
So when you consider these changes, the bloating, the fingernails, the hair, and then you consider the fact that they had living relatives who were wasting away, getting thinner and dying, the changes we see with post-mortem decomposition is being interpreted as a vampire cult.
Right.
As the TB victim drained of life, the recently deceased appeared to almost supernaturally show signs of being alive, as if the dead had been feeding on the living. The question remains, how did they believe the vampire was killed? What was this experiment to stop the spread of this dreaded disease through the family? For Bell and Tony, the chase is on. He heads back to Connecticut and the state archives. Here, he hunts through old newspapers for the final piece of evidence.
Ah, here it is. This is what I'm looking for. This is from the Norwich Weekly Courier in May of 1854.
In back issues of a paper which JB himself might have read, Bell and Tony has struck gold.
A strange and almost incredible tale of superstition has been related to us of a scene recently enacted at Jewett City.
The story tells of a local household, the Ray family, who were dying one by one of TB and getting desperate. After 2 sons had died, when a third took ill, they decided on drastic measures.
It was determined to exhume the bodies of the 2 brothers already dead. And for what reason do our readers imagine? Because the dead were supposed to feed upon the living.
They went down to the graveyard to carry out a bizarre ritual.
The family and friends of the deceased proceeded to the burial ground at Jewett City, dug up the bodies of the deceased brothers, and burned them on the spot.
For Bell and Tony, the picture is now clear.
Here's what I think happened. JB dies of tuberculosis. He's buried in the family graveyard. Subsequent to that, other family members now start coming down with the disease. And as they come down with the disease, the family gets desperate. They go back to the very graveyard. They dig into JB's coffin.
But on opening the lid, years after death, they discovered there was no body left to burn. The flesh had already decomposed.
They're probably aghast to see that his mortal remains just skeletalized, dark tissue. The heart was probably gone.
With the desperate feeling that they must somehow stop the vampire leaving the grave at night to suck the life from the living, they did the only thing they could and rearranged his bones. If his head was decapitated, he would not see where he was going. Without his limbs, he could no longer leave the grave.
So in order to put him to rest, they removed his legs, they decapitated his skull, and they reburied him. And they did this in order to save the living.
For Bell and Tony, the mystery of JB is finally laid to rest.
You know, when we first excavated JB, who would have thought we would have been brought into a journey in the world of vampirism and the undead? We'll probably never ever see anything like this ever again.